On September 29, 2006, detectives discovered the body of a young woman in St. Patrick's Church in Glasgow, United Kingdom. They had no idea that this crime was just the tip of the iceberg, and the investigation eventually led them to one of the most ruthless serial criminals in the country. Peter Britton Tobin was born on August 27, 1946, in Johnston, Scotland. He was the youngest of 8 children born to Marjorie and Daniel Tobin. From an early age, Peter displayed a difficult character. As a result, in 1953, at the age of 7, his parents sent him to a boarding school. However, this apparently did not help, as he was later sent to a correctional facility, although the reasons for this are unknown. After this period, he moved to Brighton, England. At that time, Peter began a relationship with 17-year-old Margaret Mountney. The young woman, who worked as a typist, was captivated by his charming personality, and in August 1969, they married. But soon, Peter's cruel, controlling, and abusive nature became evident. As if that wasn't enough, he was also involved in criminal activities. A year later, he was convicted and imprisoned in England for theft and document forgery. After that, Margaret decided to divorce him. In 1973, Peter married Sylvia Jeffries, a 30-year-old local nurse. She was also struck by his irresistible charm. That same year, the couple had their first son, whom they named Ian, and 2 years later, they had a daughter, Claire. Unfortunately, she passed away shortly after birth. Grieving the loss of their child, Sylvia also became a victim of Peter's abuse. So in 1976, she left him, taking their young son with her. Decades later, at around the age of 40, Peter was ready for a new romance. This time, his chosen one was Katie Wilson. At 16, Katie was vulnerable, invisible, and impressible, so it was easy for him to start a relationship with her. At first, they moved in together, and soon they had a son, Daniel, the couple's only child. They married in 1989 and then moved to Scotland. This was a difficult time for Katie. Her husband did not allow her to go outside and tried to control every step she took. His violence escalated to a significant level, and as a result, the young woman mustered the courage to escape with her son at the end of the 1990s. It is unknown whether Katie's departure was the reason for Peter's worst qualities emerging, but it is clear that from that moment on, Peter stepped into the world with the worst of himself and was ready to cause great harm. Unfortunately, his path crossed with the life of a lovely young woman named Vicky Hamilton. Vicky was born in Scotland in 1976 and was the second child in the family of Michael and Janet Hamilton. They had already had their first child, a daughter named Sharon, and later had 2 more children, Lee and Lindsay. However, serious disagreements arose between the couple, and divorce was the best solution. Vicky, Lee, and Lindsay were placed under their mother's care, and they had to move to South London while their elder daughter stayed in Bathgate. However, the distance did not prevent Vicky and Sharon from maintaining their close relationship. When Vicky turned 15, Sharon decided that it was a good opportunity for her sister to take a step toward independence, something that teenagers often look forward to. After the 15-year-old girl went on a weekend trip to Scotland, she was supposed to return to her mother's house. This was the first trip she had taken alone by bus. Sharon considered it a small but significant adventure. On Saturday, February 9, 1991, the sisters went shopping and chatted excitedly. Sunday was no different from other days, except that Vicky was very nervous about the trip. The evening of February 10th was cold and snowy. Vicky checked if she had enough money for the fare, and together with her sister, double-checked the bus route she would be taking. Then they hugged each other tightly. The girl was standing at a bus stop, snacking on a bag of crisps opposite the police station, and it was there, while waiting for transport, that her path crossed with Peter. He dragged Vika into his car by force, raped her, and then, to prevent her from informing on him or simply out of malice, killed her. He kept the girl's handbag. When Vicky did not arrive at her mother's house and there was no news of her, the family, in despair, began searching for her and simultaneously notified the authorities of her disappearance. As soon as the police began investigating her disappearance, Vicky's face became one of the most recognizable in Scotland, and the search operation became one of the largest in the country's history. While the case caused a stir in Scotland, Peter decided to head to southeast England, specifically to Margate, where he settled in a beautiful house with a garden and brought Vicky's lifeless body there. There, Peter wrapped her remains in plastic bags and hid them under a thick layer of concrete, then covered everything with soil. The neighbors then assumed he had dug a sandbox for his little son, who was 3 years old in 1991. He had come to Margate to spend some time with his father. The man's name never appeared in the initial investigation of Vicky's disappearance. The police, finding no leads on her whereabouts, considered her a probable runaway. They believed she was a troubled teenager due to her parents' divorce. Their theory of voluntary disappearance was reinforced on February 21, 1991, when Vicky's wallet was found near the main bus station in Edinburgh. Peter, who was always one step ahead of the authorities, created this false lead, achieving his goal of completely altering the course of the investigation. Detectives spent 2 fruitless months searching for her in London. It is known that Vicky's mother passed away shortly after this. Over the following decade, while her family and the townspeople continued to monitor the case, the police recorded over 7,000 names in their files. They took almost 4,000 statements, presented around 500 documents, and 380 potential pieces of evidence. But all of this led to a dead end, and in the end, the case was swept under the rug. The next young woman to have the misfortune of crossing paths with Peter was Dinah McNichol, a native of Essex. She had a brother and 3 sisters. Her father was a jazz musician, and her mother had died many years ago in a car accident. At 18, Dinah was a good person, a happy girl, and a wonderful friend. She had just finished high school and had high hopes for her future. On one hand, she wanted to take a year off, perhaps to travel, but on the other hand, she wanted to go to university. However, at that moment, nothing was certain because, although Dinah had submitted applications, she had not received any responses from the universities. During the first weekend of August 1991, the young woman attended a music festival in Hampshire. There, she met a young man named David Tremlett. Between dances, they discovered they liked each other. On Sunday, August 4th, they spent the night together in a tent. The next day, Dinah helped him take down the tent, and they agreed to hitchhike home. Since part of their route was the same, they decided to travel together. Tired and happy, they went to the road to hitch a ride. That's when Peter appeared and offered to give them a lift. David was the first to get out, and Dinah wrote down his phone number before saying goodbye to him. Left alone with the unknown driver, the girl was about to experience a true nightmare. On that very Monday, August 5th, 1991, he did the same thing he had done to Vicky. Dinah's handkerchief was used as a gag. After committing the horrific crime, Peter withdrew money from her account at ATMs in Hampshire and Sussex. When her relatives saw that money was being withdrawn from Dinah's account, they immediately thought it was someone else and that something had happened to the girl. Her family knew how carefully she saved every penny and that she had planned to use the money either for travel or for continuing her education. Days and weeks passed, and the worst thing for the family was living in uncertainty. Even if no one said it out loud, everyone was sure that something terrible had happened. If Dinah had been alive, she would have already returned home or called to explain her absence. As for Peter, he left Margate without saying goodbye or offering any explanations. Later in 1993, he settled in Hampshire, specifically in a rented apartment in League Park. He justified the move by saying that he wanted to be closer to his younger son. On August 4th, 1993, 2 14-year-old girls went to visit a local resident. However, the person they were looking for was not home, and they decided to ask other neighbors if they had seen her. As a result, they knocked on Peter's door. Peter saw a unique opportunity and invited them inside to wait for the person they were searching for. The girls, seeing that the apartment contained his 5-year-old son, took him for a friendly man and agreed to enter. But there is another version about the reasons for this meeting, which was not accidental. 2 girls came to Peter's house in response to a request for a nanny made by the man. They trusted him because, upon arrival, they saw his son and stayed to look after him. Everyone agrees that when the child fell asleep, Peter tied them up, threatened them with a knife, and forced them to drink alcohol. Then he beat them, raped them, as a result of which one of the girls was injured. At the moment when they thought their lives would end at the hands of this extremely cruel man, fortunately, the boy woke up. He saved them from the same tragic fate that befell Vika and Dinah. Trying not to let his son understand what had happened, and what kind of father he was, the man decided to leave the apartment with the child. According to some reports, Peter left around 2 in the morning, but before that, he turned on the gas in the kitchen, hoping to complete his monstrous task. However, the girls regained their composure and managed to escape. They went to the police and told them about all the atrocities committed by the subject, whom they described in detail. At the same time, Peter returned the child to his mother and, under a false name, joined a religious cult called the Communion of Jesus. He hoped to remain unnoticed there. Meanwhile, the media published his photograph, provided by the police, and his face became widely recognized. As a result of widespread media coverage, information about this man began to surface, and his car was identified. Thanks to the BBC Crime Watch program, he was located, and after 40 days of fleeing, he was captured in Brighton. He appeared in court on May 18, 1994, where he pleaded guilty to sexual assault and indecent behavior towards 2 young girls. He was sentenced to 14 years in prison, but did not serve the full term. He was released in 2004 at the age of 58. Immediately after his release, he returned to Scotland, trying to get as far away as possible from the area where his name had been entered into the sex offender registry. His trail was lost for a while until 2006, when he showed up at St. Patrick's Church in Glasgow under a false name in the guise of a beggar. To avoid detection, he adopted the name Pat McLaughlin. Dennis and Katie Curran, a married couple from the church charity group, would never forget the evening when the beggar came to them seeking shelter. Despite his defenseless appearance, Katie had a bad feeling about this man. Peter was raised as a Catholic and soon felt comfortable in the church. Moreover, his obvious begging served as an effective cover, as it only elicited sympathy from the parishioners. And besides that, few paid him much attention. As a result, he wandered freely around the church, which was the perfect place for him to hide. However, his predatory nature remained untouched, and being in a sacred place held no true significance for him. Calculating every step, Peter showed a willingness to participate in the repairs that the church required. About 6 or 7 weeks later, he asked the priest to take him on as maintenance staff. At that time, people in need or financial hardship typically sought shelter in churches. This is how Angelika Clack met Peter. Angelika was a 23-year-old girl from Poland who came to Scotland in the summer of 2006. She wanted to use her holidays to work, earn some money, and finance her language studies in her home country. At that time, she was living in the parish house of St. Patrick's Church, where she also worked as a cleaner. Peter immediately took a liking to her, and somehow he managed to convince her to occasionally help him with various tasks. On Sunday, September 24, 2006, Angelika spent several hours helping him paint a shed. Some parishioners saw them together. At one point, Peter attacked her in the back of the chapel. 47-year-old Lika Brown and her husband, 46-year-old Andrew, heard a woman scream through the open windows of their apartment, which overlooked the church. In her subsequent testimony, Lika described the sound as a brief scream and said it sounded like someone was being forcibly held. It was so horrific that it made her get up from the couch and go to the window, but she saw nothing. The scream the Browns heard was when Peter surprised the young girl, who had her back to him. He hit her hard and dragged her to the back of the chapel, where he continued to beat her. After she lost consciousness, he raped her and then stabbed her several times. Peter hid the body in the basement under the floor near the confessional. At this moment, Angelika was still alive. Several hours later, parishioners noticed the young woman was missing. Dennis told his wife Kathy about the unusual disappearance. The police immediately began their investigation, interviewing members of the community one by one. During these interviews, it was revealed that the last person seen with Angelika was Peter, though he was disguised as Pat, a beggar laborer. As a result, he became the main suspect, and officers went to interrogate him. But they found no evidence, so the investigation into her disappearance continued. Peter knew that it was only a matter of time before they found the body and caught him, so he fled to London. By this time, Detective David Swindle had joined the investigation. He suspected this might not just be a case of disappearance, and everything his team had uncovered, as well as the gathered testimonies, made him believe that Angelika was likely not going to be found alive. Finally, on September 29, 2006, authorities discovered the body in the chapel. The news shocked the British public, especially because of the location the criminal had chosen to hide the body. Looking at the injuries the girl had sustained, Detective David suspected that the perpetrator had acted before, but he still didn't know how horrific the person he was tracking down truly was. However, soon they received some news. The DNA found at the crime scene on the body matched the data in the UK's National Criminal Intelligence Database. That's when they discovered the person they were searching for was Peter Tobin, whose fingerprints were also found at the crime scene. Therefore, the first step taken by the authorities was the publication of his photographs in the media for nationwide distribution. His image was also sent to the Fugitive Task Force. Additionally, the Scottish police contacted the Metropolitan Police, and searches were initiated across the entire United Kingdom. Meanwhile, Peter, who was in London, tried to hide in a place where he thought he wouldn't be found. He went to a hospital pretending to have heart problems, claiming he was experiencing chest pain and weakness on the left side of his body. The man said he was a plumber and gave his name as James. He was examined by Dr. Nick Losov, who conducted several tests. However, something in his face and behavior made the doctor feel uncomfortable. Initially, Peter avoided making eye contact, which was unusual for a patient. Then, when the test found no physical cause for the pain he described, the doctor became suspicious. His doubts were confirmed by a nurse who recognized Peter from his photograph, which had been circulating in the media. As a result, both the nurse and the doctor contacted the police. This phone call changed the entire direction of the investigation. On September 30th, police officer Alan Murray was dispatched to the hospital in London. Peter was taken to a ward, and Alan went there to speak with him. The man was immediately arrested, although initially he was only charged with breaching the sex offender registration conditions. This strategy allowed officers to buy time to prepare the case against him. The evidence gathered by the police team, led by Detective David, resulted in Peter being tried in late March 2007 for crimes against Angelica. Despite all the evidence against him, the man denied committing violent actions against the woman. However, in an attempt to avoid being convicted of rape, he claimed that they had consensual sex. Peter also denied giving false information to the police and hospital staff. After 6 weeks of trial, his lies and manipulations were proven ineffective, and he was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 21 years. One might have thought that the authorities would be satisfied with this outcome, but Detective David and his team were convinced that there was more to Peter's story. While the trial was ongoing, the detectives studied Peter's life, gathered other evidence, and compiled a dossier with the help of law enforcement agencies across the country. However, to avoid jeopardizing or interfering with Angelica's case, they chose to conduct their work confidentially. The joint police operation was called Anagram, and part of the work involved connecting missing persons cases with places where Peter had been. During the course of the investigation, detectives were able to establish 2 precise connections, one in Batgate and the other in Market. Several weeks later, a search was conducted at Peter's old house on the coast, where they found a knife with DNA samples hidden in the attic. However, there was nothing else there. They then proceeded to the house where the man had lived in Market, and there, they had no doubt that they were dealing with a serial killer. The investigators dug up a sandbox in the garden of the house that the man had made for his son. There they discovered a female body. As they continued their search at the same site, they found another one. A women's purse was also found at the scene, which the team kept for DNA analysis. While the forensic experts were trying to identify the victims' identities, ages, and potential dates of death, they also analyzed the purse found at the crime scene. Strong genetic traces were found on it, but there was no match in the national DNA database. However, on June 1, 2007, the DNA matched Peter's fingerprint. This was a breakthrough, and the officers decided to pursue this lead. On November 14, 2007, the authorities confirmed that one of the bodies belonged to Vicky Hamilton, who had disappeared when she was 15 during her first solo trip. Her family had been waiting for an answer for 16 years. It was later announced that the second body belonged to 18-year-old Dina McNichol, who was hitchhiking home after attending a concert. On September 1, 2008, the Crown Prosecution Service contacted Peter's lawyers, accusing him of the murder of Vicky, which led to him standing trial. Officers had to restrain Vicky's father, Michael, after he saw Peter face to face. As he later admitted, at that moment, he just wanted the man to know that he was there, defending his daughter's name and protecting her memory. After a month-long trial, on December 2, 2008, Peter was found guilty of the murder of Vicky and was sentenced to life imprisonment. The trial for Dina took place in December 2009. On December 16th, after the defense failed to present evidence to justify their client, the jury found Peter guilty of Dina's murder. He was subsequently given his third life sentence. Friends, what do you think of this story? Please write your opinion in the comments and also subscribe to my YouTube channel.